Greetings and salutations, DMs, GMs, referees, judges, game operations directors, and all other varieties of storytellers. This is your DM, Scott, and it's time for another DM Quick Tip.
It's Milestone Leveling this week on DM Quick Tips. One of our listeners asked for this topic, so Edward Brown, here you go. The traditional way to level up a player character in Dungeons & Dragons is using experience points. The Dungeon Master gives out a specific number of experience points, and the players cross-reference the total number of their experience points against the leveling chart. Back in the old days, every class had a leveling chart. If you obtain enough total experience points, then you level up. Pretty simple, right? I got away from giving out experience points about 37 years ago. Now, I don't have a fancy system for leveling my players' characters. There really is no science involved at all. It's really more of an art form than a science. In the early days, I just went with whether or not it felt right to level up the players' characters. Today, my method is a little more refined, but I still operate a great deal on how it feels. You really have to find a method that works well for you and, of course, your table. First, let's talk about why I decided to go away with granting experience points at my table. Well, back in the old days of Dungeons & Dragons, player characters got experience points for slaying monsters, getting gold and other treasure, and getting magic items. What I found was that I really enjoyed the story and the role play of Dungeons & Dragons. I like the action and combat too, but I wanted there to be a purpose behind the action and combat. I wanted there to be an engaging story wrapped around that action and that combat. I think my players did as well because they always enjoyed the story. Now, the 15-year-old me did not tell stories as refined as the 50-year-old me does. But still, I enjoyed the story the most. What I found was that my players really liked leveling up as well as all players do. My table was no different really than anyone else's. Leveling up meant your character became more powerful. Usually, there were magic items associated with leveling up. You would find them here and there in dungeons or other adventures that you played in. My players, well, they still enjoy leveling up. It wasn't long before they realized that the key to leveling up was through killing things, taking their stuff, and getting magic items. So I ended up with hack and slash and no attention paid to the story. I didn't like that. I felt like I had some good stories to tell, but they would be lost amidst the murder hoboing. Really, who could blame them, right? If that was the way to grow your character, then why not do it? Today, with 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, you earn experience points in a similar fashion. A creature's challenge rating has an experience point award attached to it. 0 CR creatures have fewer experience points than, let's say, a 30 CR creature. The old way of handing out experience points assumes that there is only one real solution to a problem, and that is through violence and theft. In some cases, violence may be the only option a party has to overcome an encounter. But surely, that's not the only solution to every problem. As my players grew more skilled and mature, I found that my players that were more into role-playing than others were somehow left out of the bigger scenario because hacking and slashing was the way to go and the way to grow. Now that I've explained why I changed to milestone leveling and never went back, let's talk about how I milestone level my players' characters. All my stories have milestones, as should yours. They have a series of small challenges that the player characters have to overcome, but they must reach these milestones to level their characters. And I only give one level at a time. I only give one level at a time because, well, it just makes sense. I want players to get to know the perks of the new level and get used to playing that level. They really need to know their characters, and they want to know their characters inside and out as well. Giving out more than one level at a time is almost like skipping a grade in school, but not really. being ready for it. So what do these milestones look like? Well, again, there's no real science. I operate totally on feel, which is probably an ass-backward way of doing things. But I came from an era of the game where there weren't a lot of rules, so the DM had to find their own way. So let me give you an example. My group was holed up in a church tower in a town that went absolutely mad. There were strange mutated townsfolk running about at night, cannibals, strange insect-like creatures. It was really dangerous. Something was amiss in the city, and their overall goal initially was to find out what had happened and how. Their secondary goal was to get out of the city alive. The first milestone was to get out of the tower and survive the night. Pretty simple. How they did it, I didn't really care. I knew that I had a table full of inventive players that, when they collaborated, were a force to be reckoned with. Heck, even when they acted all on their own, they were a force to be reckoned with. The second milestone was to find one of the lost party members. This was an NPC, and the only one that they thought may have survived. And this only because they didn't see this NPC being torn to bits as they did the others. Now, there were several milestones necessary to the completion of the campaign. The milestones grew in complexity and difficulty as the players leveled. The first milestone was enough to level them from 1 to level 2. That's only 300 experience points. But by the end of the campaign, they are faced with getting out of the city as their final milestone. Easy enough, right? Well, they had to find a way to avoid the mobs of creatures roaming the streets. They had to find a way to actually get out of the city because there had been a magical barrier established around the city to contain the creatures within it and keep them from pouring out into the lands around the city. To make things more difficult, there was another party of adventurers from a different table that had been sent to the city since they believed the initial party, that's my party, the one at my table, had been killed. So when my party finally made it to the main gates of the city, they found a magical barrier around it, and standing on the other side of the barrier was DM Bill's table, who, I understand, had been talking about not letting my party get through the barrier because they had no idea if my party was dangerous, just like the other creatures within the city. So kudos to them for not metagaming. This final milestone was established with the intent to bring them all the way to the 8th level. Now you can see how that is a more complex milestone than getting out of a church's bell tower and surviving a night out on the streets. When I hand out levels, milestones are achieved not as individuals, but as a party. This way, players don't get left behind, and you don't get that large gap in levels that could cause problems for your game. So if someone can't make it because of work or family obligations, illness, whatever, they're not left behind. I mean, life happens, right? You can run into huge disparities in character levels otherwise, and you run the risk of losing players. If a player has a character that is constantly dying because they are 3 levels or more too low for the campaign that you're running, then where's the fun? So there you have it, Ed. That's my not so scientific method for handing out milestone leveling and why I do that. With everything in running Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing games, you have to develop your own method. Find out what works for you and your table. You can glean practices that you like from other DMs at other tables. But always keep in mind, it doesn't have to be fancy. What you should really be concerned with above all else is whether or not you and your players are having a good time. Find your flow and work with it. Now, there are many ways to level up your players' characters, but this is my preferred way. See you next time in the dojo.